dear representatives of European regions, towns, cities, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me and pleasure to be here on behalf of the European Investment Bank. Thank you, Mr. President, for the invitation. It is very important for us at the EIB to be in touch with you and to have an open discussion about how we promote more investment in Europe. I think that we are what I would call partners in battle. It's a battle for better Europe. And we are partners because you are the ones who are the face of Europe on the local level. I was myself in the national government. My father was actually a mayor of a small city or village in Slovakia. So I have observed how it works at the national and local level. And I think you have a great role. You have an important role of making sure that Europe is understood at the local level and that Europe is presented in the way that people understand that it has added value. And we are your partners because we are a bank of the European Union. We are the bank which is owned by the member states of the European Union, and our role is to make sure that Europe develops economically and that Europe is an important part of the global economy. So I think this is something that we have to do together. And I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for the publication, Obstacles to Investments at Local and Regional Level. I will make sure that we study this very carefully and see how we can help with removing some of the obstacles and how we can fill some elements of this investment gap we are discussing. Let me say a little more about how we, at least from the EIB perspective, how we see the investment climate today. I think on one hand it's a positive news because we see that the European Union is growing overall. I think we have overcome the financial crisis of the recent years. But on the other hand, we are still facing many challenges. The investment in the EU on average is 15% below the pre-crisis peak. In some countries, even more than 50%. So there is still a lot of catch-up to do. We did a study, the EIB, about the overall investment climate. We did a survey which was basically done in cooperation with the national institutions in all 28 countries, mostly surveying corporations, companies in the countries, asking them about how they see the situation. The good news was that unlike, let's say, 5 or 7 years ago, the main problem is not so much access to financing, but the key problems are, on one hand, uncertainty. Secondly, the overall bureaucracy and red tape, which is still very much suppressing the entrepreneurship. And the third one is the growing lack of the skilled labor force. So these are relatively new areas, and we have to work together to address those issues. We also have to make sure that Europe does not fall behind in the competitiveness, which has been happening, unfortunately, for the last 2 decades. Since 1990, the GDP per capita gap between the EU and the United States has increased by around 50%. Productivity growth in the European Union has trailed the United States since the mid-1990s and was hit harder during the crisis than elsewhere. Let me give some figures from the EIB's own research. An additional 130 billion a year is needed to be invested in R&D just to meet the EU target of 3% GDP. Currently, EU invests just under 2%. 55 billion euro is necessary to reach the EU's digital agenda. 10 billion euro for modern education facilities just to reach the EU standards in higher education. These are just some numbers which show that we have still a lot to do. And I think this is what you mean also by the investment gap. Matching US, United States levels of venture capital financing as a share of GDP would require around 35 billion a year in additional venture capital activity in the European Union. So these are some numbers, some very specific examples where Europe, unfortunately, has been falling apart. and falling behind. Now, what can we do, and where we see the role of the EIB in making sure that this process is stopped, reversed, and Europe moves ahead as a strong economic force? We believe that we have to move in parallel at least on 3 levels. One, we have to improve the overall environment for investment. We need to push for structural changes which would allow such better environment to exist. We have to provide a broader array of financial products and services. And we have to focus on so-called smart development. We have to make sure that the innovation is an integrated component of our economic development, because Europe has always prospered on innovation, on the skills of the people. We were not the region which was much on natural resources, but it was really the brains of our people who made us a frontrunner in economic development globally. So those are the issues that we need to focus upon. This is what we have to do. And here, local and regional governments and authorities are extremely important. You are responsible for more than half of public investment in the European Union. More than half. So you are the force who can make change in Europe. Our role at the EIB is to empower you, to give you the opportunity to utilize this great impact that you may have in Europe. We support regional policy in 3 principal ways: with loans to individual projects, with framework loans to pre-finance the national contribution to the grant money, and finally with advisory, both financial and technical. As was already mentioned by the President, EIB is also managing the European Fund for Strategic Investments, which is an important part of the so-called Juncker Plan or European Investment Plan for Europe. As of today, the European Fund for Strategic Investments has managed to prepare the mobilization of some 170 billion euro of new investments across Europe on the back of projects which are approved from the EIB budget of 32 billion euro. So this is more than half of the 315 billion euro, which is the target for the European Investment Plan in its first part. Let me give you, so I'm a little more specific, let me give you some examples of projects which we supported and which were approved by the Board of Directors of the EIB just last week. For example, ESPO Life Cycle Schools. I think Mr. President knows it very well. It's a project in Finland. Lower Silesia Regional Roads in Poland. Treviso Hospital Project, PPP project in Italy. Palma de Mallorca Urban Bus Fleet Renewal in Spain. Istrian Riviera Development in Croatia. These are just some illustrations of the projects which are supported by EIB, which we do on a regular basis. These are just projects which were approved last week by the board. We want to do more of these projects. And as already Mr. President mentioned in his introductory speech, one of the ways how EIB can be helpful, especially to weaker regions and municipalities, is by extending our support, our advisory services to those municipalities and regions. We are ready to do that, and I see as one of my main responsibilities to so-called localize or to bring the European Advisory Hub, which is part of the European Investment Plan, closer to local places. We have to make sure that the advice reaches those who need it most, whether those are municipalities, regions, or companies which are located in the regions of Europe. The local presence of advisory should allow for better preparation of projects, and this is one of the key priorities we have. Also, at the end, I would like to mention 2 other priorities and areas where we could work together with you on the local and regional levels to move Europe forward. One area are cross-border projects. Europe is about integration and about working across borders. Unfortunately, within the EFSI or within the European Investment Plan, we haven't seen many cross-border projects. We have to do more. And this can be done only if we work closely with you, with the bordering regions, with cities, towns, who can share the experience, who can do work together. We are going to support more such sub-regional structures as, for example, Danube strategy. We want to make sure that this type of regionally integrated cross-border areas can prosper and develop joint projects. And the second area where I see a lot of potential for the future is the area of smart specialization. The main hubs of innovations are usually concentrated around cities and so-called smart regions. We have to make sure that we have more engines of innovations throughout Europe, and I would say especially in the cohesion regions and countries. Here we are working together with the European Commission on launching a joint initiative to support development of smart cities and regions throughout Europe, where the European Investment Bank would provide financial support for such projects. So to finish, Mr. President, we are looking forward to our cooperation. We see a huge potential for working together. Actually, we see you as a key partner in making sure that we have more projects in our pipeline and that we can bring more money to Europe for making Europe a better place for our children and grandchildren. Thank you very much for your attention.